For over 12 months, Scottish football supporters have been locked out of grounds, unable to see their team in the flesh. In these times, coverage of Scottish football has become more important than ever, along with rising numbers of fan media outlets covering the top flight and beyond. So what's best? More traditional coverage from pundits on TV, radio and in newspapers? Or the new kid on the block? Coverage in the form of podcasts and websites around every team, by the fans, for the fans. To find out, firstly we must discuss the issue of succulent lamb journalism. To do so, I caught up with the Times journalist, Graham Spiers. Okay, so Graham, succulent lamb journalism, that's a phrase that people might have heard of, they might be confused by that. Can you sort of explain the context behind that phrase?
Gosh, it's an old theme now, this, Ryan. Oh, succulent lamb journalism. It involves a trip that me and my old mucker, Jim Traynor, went on when we went to see David Murray in Jersey years and years ago in 1998. And Jim and I used to tease each other about our journalism, and I thought that he was a little bit sycophantic in the piece he wrote about David Murray. We'd all gone out for dinner one night, and we had lamb. Lamb was on the menu, and David Murray was boasting that this was a great restaurant and with wonderful food. And we had lamb. Actually, it was a bit chewy and a bit gristly. But Jim Traynor wrote a piece in the Daily Record saying how wonderful the meal was and how typical it was of Sir David to provide this wonderful cuisine. And he referred to the lamb as succulent lamb in the piece. He said, David Murray's succulent lamb. What else would you expect from the chairman of Rangers? And I read this piece in the Record and I thought this was a bit sooky and a bit grovelly. And I referred to it in print as succulent lamb journalism.
Yeah, so you mentioned there that interview 1998, I think you said a little while ago. Do you think that's still a problem now? And not only with journalism, but do you think that can be related to punditry as well? Because obviously a lot of pundits, they're former footballers, they're commenting on players and teams that they've played for before. Do you think that's issues kind of there as well?
I think, former players do find it difficult on radio or television to be critical of people they've known in their career, a manager they've played under, a player they've played alongside. And it comes back to the same thing, Ryan, for very obvious human reasons. I mean, human decency dictates that if you're friends with somebody or you're close to somebody or somebody has been very good to you, you're not going to shit on them. I mean, human decency says that's not how we operate.
Graham used the example of former Aberdeen boss Derek McInnes, who had helped him out before, even gone on his podcast, but a manager who Graham had no choice but to criticise in his columns. So can fan media groups, who have no such relationships to worry about, provide an effective alternative? I spoke to Jamie Flynn from the 20 Minute Tim's podcast to find out more.
What we wanted to do was effectively, and this is how we pitched the podcast ourselves, go to the pub with a microphone and record the football chat and put it out. That was the basis for it. So the three of us bought a £50 microphone and sat down in my spare room and just spoke about Celtic. How it got to where it was going was we just kept spotting gaps that weren't fulfilled in fan media. So we were the first to do match reaction podcasts. We were the first to do scouting podcasts. We were the first to do feature podcasts on Celtic history where we would get together and talk about an old game the same way we talk about a new game. And we found we were putting out 2 podcasts a week. So we'd do the Monday Bulletin, which would discuss the Celtic news of the week in the most recent game. And then we would do the Thursday feature podcast, which was either a look back at an old game or an interview with an ex-player. Like, nobody was really doing this. So that Thursday podcast was the sort of feature. And then I'd sort of floated the idea to the guys and we discussed, look, we could probably make something of this if we use this platform, Patreon, that I'd heard a couple of other podcasts were using. And again, I think we were definitely the first Celtic podcast, but I know Heart and Hand, the Rangers podcast, launched a really successful Patreon. So what we did was we took the Thursday podcast and put it behind a paywall. And from there, people signed up and that gave us the freedom and the motivation to think up new things and use the platform. But that platform's there and people are signed up, people are using it, and people have got a user base. You just think shit that you want to put on it. This would be cool if we did this would be cool if we did that. And that's kind of how it grew to what it is.
To find out what presenters make of fan media, I caught up with one of the best in the business, in Clyde 1 Superscoreboard host, Gordon Duncan.
We got someone from Talk Livy, I think that was the name of the podcast, on. And that's something that we would maybe do now and then if we were looking to cover a story in a particular way and we were not willing to just kind of sit back and hope that someone phoned in, because they might not. So we might take the initiative that way, and I think fan media has been a good, given us a good option on that front.
So can fans of so-called smaller clubs be the experts? Jamie Cockburn from the St Mirren podcast The Misery Hunters gave me his thoughts.
It's something we've actually touched a few times on the podcast within itself, where we've kind of brought up about how little research pundits actually do on St Mirren. We've pointed it out before, like people like Chris Sutton, anytime St Mirren was on BT Sports, he would pick out one player to say, oh, St Mirren have got this player, he's really good, and he always picked Kyle McAllister. So as St Mirren fans, Kyle McAllister has a ton of potential, but he very, very rarely shows it. And he was always a focal point for any pundit that's clearly not done any research and just went, oh, I've heard him, he has potential, so I'll just say, oh, that's where the danger comes from, when it's not, it's actually coming from another player. And that actually happened this season again as well with Andy Walker commentating on the match. He said that McAllister had a shot and it went way wide, and he said, well, you know the threat that McAllister brings, he's always one for goals. He scored 1 goal in 2 years. It's just complete. It's almost laziness on their part, because with the Old Firm, they've got so much there at their disposal, where non-Old Firm they would need to do a wee bit of research, and that the research just isn't there.
Sometimes you've just got to step back and realise how unique Scotland is. There can't be many countries that function like us with these two massive clubs, and then even within the same division, I mean, within the same top flight, Hamilton Accies, Livy, really, really small supporter bases. So we are pretty unique in that front. So I think there is a slight inevitability that those fans will be experts at times yet.
BBC Scotland pundit Leanne Crichton also spoke highly of the rise of fan media.
And I actually really enjoy it. I think it gives a kind of greater insight into the feelings and the thoughts of those fans and supporters, and how they think their club's getting on. And of course it's been a tough year, so I think it's really affected more people than you could even imagine. So I actually quite enjoy it. Even last night when I was working, there was a guy on from the Celtic kind of fans forum, which was the State of Mind, I think it was called, and you kind of hear the passionate side, and of course they're just like any other supporters, but I do think there's probably a bit more thought, and kind of that type of affiliation, I think, adds a kind of quality of content.
As a pundit, obviously, no matter how much football you're going to watch, you're not ever going to see every game. Do you think there's maybe an argument that, fans of certain clubs, maybe the so-called smaller clubs, do you think they're maybe could be sort of known as the experts, because maybe pundits are never going to be able to see every game, and the fans do see their team every week? Do you think there's sort of something in that?
Being a pundit myself, if you're across 2, 3, 4 divisions at times, that's often enough, because otherwise you really dilute the quality of your knowledge, and it's tough to really have that emotional connection with clubs. And like certain divisions, I've probably found myself over the last number of years maybe not watching as much English football, because I would rather just engross myself in the Scottish game and get to know the players more and their story. And certainly that is what the fans add.
When you talk about fan media, quite often you're talking about fans that watch every minute of their team's games. So if I'm, as a mainstream so-called professional journalist, coming on to pontificate about Celtic or Rangers or Aberdeen or Dundee United, I've not seen every minute of their games, but the fans have.
The power of supporters can be summed up here in Paisley, as fans can turn up to their fan-owned club and return home listening to fan-owned media. So fan media can bring knowledge, different ideas and an independent approach where they aren't afraid of upsetting any clubs with what they say. But is there a problem here? Do you think there's a dilemma starting to develop here where the access for fan media is starting to increase? A lot of these podcasts, particularly at Celtic and Rangers, are starting to go to these press conferences. Do you think that might impact the independence. You know, they could fall into this trap of developing that relationship, maybe getting too close to these, you know, players and managers, and also not being able to say as much as they want, because at the end of the day they might not get asked back.
I suspect there's a Pravda-like danger with fan media who are given press tickets by the club to go to the game, in as much as if they absolutely criticise the club, they'll get their press ticket taken away. So I think that's quite restricting in a way. If you're fan media at Rangers, for example, and you've got a ticket to games and you think this is brilliant, and you actually think that Stuart Robertson, the Rangers managing director, is a disaster area. Say you think he's hopeless as a chief exec or a managing director, are you going to say it? Of course you're not, because he'll take your game ticket away. So it's limiting in that sense. And by the way, that pressure also applies to journalists. I think some journalists might be worried that they'll get their press ticket taken away if they criticise a club too harshly. And it's happened in my case. I've been banned by Rangers, so I know what I'm talking about.
I think there is. I think, you know, what is the difference between fan media and professional media? If you're a fan media outfit, but your full-time job is covering Celtic, and you go to press conferences, and you've got these relationships, where is exactly is the line? Is it because you don't work for a newspaper? Is it because, you know, there is definitely a dilemma there. I also think, you know, I would rather be outside the tent listening than inside the tent when it comes to press conference. You know, if I get to say whatever I want about the club on the podcast within reason, as you say, and they can't refuse press access, they can take away or dig me up about it or whatever. But another thing is, it sort of works in the opposite way, is I'm a little uneasy with the concept of going to a press conference and having an opportunity as a fan to be sat in front of the Celtic manager and ask him a question of whatever type. What's happening with Christopher Ajer this week? I heard there's a transfer from Roma. Is he going? No, we've had no offers for Christopher Ajer this week. And then I go back on my podcast and say, we shouldn't be even entertaining offers about Christopher Ajer. And that answer was really weak, and the manager needs to be stronger about that. And I think to myself, right, but I had the opportunity as I was sat in front of the Celtic manager to say what I wanted to say, but I didn't take it. So I'm sort of on a platform where he doesn't have that right to reply, commenting on his answer. So it's a bit, for me, it's still a bit woolly. And until I understand and I'm more comfortable with the dynamic, I wouldn't necessarily be in it. Plus, again, does it make good content? Celtic put the press conferences up on YouTube. After every press conference, you go watch it, or you read it in the newspaper in its entirety, or it's on a million websites and other podcasts are running it. Like, if people want YouTube, if people want press conference comments, they can find them easily. I just don't see the benefit of us being there asking one, really.
Rangers, in my view, are trying to, I think, I might be wrong about this, but I think they're trying to ostracise mainstream media, guys like me, and they want clubbable, approving fan media to come in and report to the world what's happening at the club. And it was quite interesting. One guy from Four Lads at Rangers, he got a fan media ticket, and I think after a week or two, he seemed to say, I don't like this. I got the impression he was saying, I prefer being on the outside looking in. I prefer being totally autonomous. Only he can speak for his reasons, but it seemed to be he preferred being on the outside rather than being on the inside. And I must admit, I thought that was quite laudable of him. I could see why he was thinking that. I might be wrong. Maybe he felt he had more editorial freedom, more freedom of expression, more freedom of polemic, being outside the ring than being inside and being slightly regimented and dictated to, or feeling slightly constrained by the club.
So is the standard of Scottish football punditry good enough?
Take, for instance, Chris Boyd, right? I'm sure the people at Sky love Chris Boyd, because every game he opens his mouth and says something and it's in the paper for a week after it. And that's probably really good for Sky, and it's probably really good for Chris Boyd because it's keeping him in a job. But you're watching it and you've got Chris Boyd offering analysis on Celtic games, and he's kind of there saying things to bam up Celtic fans a wee bit and being like cheat, and you're like, this is not really what I'm wanting, Chris. You know what I mean? You're an ex-footballer. I want to understand the game. And to be fair to him, sometimes you're watching Chris Boyd and only when someone scores a goal, he'll go, that was really clever, because you can see he took 4 steps forward and made the defender think he was going, then he looked round and went to the back post, anticipating the ball coming out, and he knows, you think, right, Chris, that's what we want. We want more of this. We don't want you going, and Cham wants to leave, and I know it for a fact.
When I'm asked to speak about different topics, whether it be a player like a Lee Griffiths, for example, and his inclusion in the game, or why he's absent from a national team, I think you always just try and relay that to moments that you've had in your career that you can possibly tap into that knowledge and understanding and what that thought process might be. Is it a fitness thing? Is it a psychological thing? What would be the conversations in and around a sports team during that moment? So I do think a lot of the opinions are valuable and can give you a better insight, because operating within a football team is not like an office job. There's a wee bit more. Probably there's a lot of other external factors that would implicate you in the reasons why. So I think a lot of the insight in what's classed as an opinion does have value, but at the same time, a lot of the time we're asked to just kind of allude to things or literally just speak about things that you really don't know the answer.
For a headline sort of thing.
And people grab those headlines. So a lot of the time as pundits, you're probably conscious of trying to get around the houses a wee bit, just so that it doesn't become a headline. For me, I would rather grab the headlines for a good piece of analysis and really being able to give an insight into the game and the performances of players, why it's worked, why it hasn't worked, rather than, Leanne Crichton says that Lee Griffiths misses out because of X, Y and Z, because it is just an opinion at the end of the day.
Do you know the only pundit that I've seen where I thought, yeah, I'd like to see more of him was probably Darren Fletcher, which is amazing because he never played any of his career in Scotland, but he seemed to know more than the rest of them that were there. So
I know other people are going to be watching this interview, but I've never saw John Hartson on TV and thought he's had an interesting thing to say about a game, ever. And the only reason he's there is because he's ex-Celtic and Wales striker John Hartson.
So do pundits get too much stick?
Yes, and by saying that, I don't mean that they should have. I don't want people to start thinking I want them to get sympathy or anything like that. It's a great job, and they get paid to talk about football. Some people actually work for a living, right? So I acknowledge that, but I think you're 100% right, because there are only a very few, a small selection of industries where you cannot make an innocent mistake without someone thinking that you deliberately made that mistake. And see if you actually stop and think about that. Think how many jobs, anything you want, mechanic, joiner, working in a bank, working in a shop, taxi driver, whatever it is. A taxi driver comes up to a junction, he takes a wrong turn, made a wrong turn. A pundit takes a wrong turn in their head, says something, just chooses the word slightly wrong, maybe just expresses themselves in a way that they wish they hadn't, under the pressure of the live radio, like you say, and all of a sudden it's because they've got an agenda against that club, or it's proof, you know what I mean? So, and don't get me wrong, that type of thing makes football go round, and our show certainly will dine out on that sort of stuff. But I would like people to, every now and then, take a step back and think, maybe that was just an innocent mistake. And I don't think it happens very often.
Yeah, listen, you could be doing a lot worse things in life. I understand that, and that's probably where maybe the jealousy comes from and the criticism comes from, because it's very easy now, and especially on social media, to sit behind a keyboard and vent your frustrations at another person. And we've probably, especially in this last year, had a bit more time to really dissect the things that we watch and the things that we hear and the way that we absorb information and the way that we express our emotions. So I understand that that's probably been heightened because of that. I think any job's tough. I think everybody, when you go to your work in a day, you always, should try your best. I think you always try and have an open mind and try and improve. And pundits are no different. For me especially, being a female working across the men's game, I'm conscious of the fact that people might perceive that as I don't have a right to be there, or I don't have that same opinion. But at the end of the day, for me, it's football is football, and if you have the knowledge and the experiences to back that up, then, I'm all for people having those opportunities.
That, of course, wasn't a mistake by me, but a thinly veiled dig at a certain pundit trying to be a presenter. But can pundits really take on presenting roles?
I think it's fine if they're the best person for the job. But some ex-footballers who are put in those positions aren't. They just aren't. And I think everyone knows it, and it just doesn't look right and it doesn't sound right. And you think, well, what's the point in that? Why not allow the similar opportunity to people who've worked all their lives at getting those sorts of skills? And there will always be loads of punditry roles, those things that people like me can't do. I'll never have that insight into the dressing room. I'll never know what it's like to have scored the last minute winner. I'll never know what it's like to be injured or released. So I don't see any problem in separating the two roles, but I also don't see any problem in blurring those lines. But as long as it's the best person for the job, and unfortunately, I don't think that is always the case.
However, Leanne spoke about her experience doing post-match interviews in the Championship this season and the player-to-player relationship she can build that a reporter may not.
I do actually feel that the players and managers are much more responsive when I speak to them, and the relationships that I've managed to build up over the course of even this season that I've been doing the interviews, the rapport with the players and the managers is really, really nice. They take time after the interviews. They're always happy to chat to me. They give me a wee bit more of an insight, probably in terms of the preparations, what players have been looking like, maybe a wee bit of competition within the squad. They do open up because I speak to them as a footballer. I'm asking them questions as a reporter, but I kind of intake that information and receive it on a football capacity, not on a media capacity, and I think they appreciate that.
I pointed to the example of BT Sport's Daryl Curry and his interview with Eden Hazard back in 2019 as an example of when tougher questioning can be used, and whether Leanne would have done the same.
That's probably something that I've really had to think hard about this season, because there has been games where I've thought, if the result goes a certain way, I will be expected to ask a question, i.e., do you think you'll lose your job? Do you feel under pressure? Do you think the board will be speaking to you next week? And at the same time, as much as people might want to hear that, I think actually the percentage of people that want to hear that now is reducing. I don't think that there's the same need and outcry, or that there should be that same amount of pressure put on managers. I would like to see the human element being put first before the business element or the journalistic viewpoint of grabbing a headline. And that's probably, for me, a crossroads I might come to, even in like the short term, that people might be saying, Leanne, you're a journalist that's being asked to do a reporting job and you need to ask these questions. But for me, I don't think I'll ever feel comfortable, because I've been on the other side of that, and I would never expect someone to really push the boundaries that much with me in the moments that I've experienced in my career.
Leanne also revealed her aims to study and develop as a media professional, exposing the potentially high levels of variation in training that pundits will do.
Even for me now, I study a professional sports writing and broadcasting degree along with the work that I do. And the reason I wanted to do that was because I felt that even in the job that I've got, being a former player, you've always only got that one viewpoint. And I wanted a bit more detail and knowledge and understanding about what the journalistic viewpoint looks like, and the questions that you could ask and you should ask, the way to go about it. And I think there is bits of that I probably don't have, because I would put myself in that player's position and think how comfortable I would feel if that person asked me that question.
So what do supporters think? In a survey of 465 Scottish football fans, 80% revealed that they were more likely to consume fan media as opposed to traditional media, as well as a further 80% who rated Scottish football punditry as either average or even poor. So with all that in mind, could the best Scottish football coverage lie in a balance of fan media, punditry and everything in between?
I think probably the healthiest thing is this uneasy alliance of all of us being in the press room at the same time. I mean, for example, there's so much good fan media out there. Rangers, Celtic, other clubs, Aberdeen, Dundee United. I've read, as much as I appear to have been critical of fan media, and I think with good cause, I'm also duty bound to say I've seen a lot of very good fan media. I've read stuff, blogs that fans have written. I've heard podcasts that fans have been involved in, and I've thought, my God, that's a really good point, or I hadn't realised that, and I've learned stuff from it.
I do still think that if you're talking journalistically or some of the pundits, they will still get an insight that fans want, whether that be speaking to managers, speaking to players on the record and off the record, maybe speaking to other people in the game, that can just give you that little bit of information that even if you are a fan and you watch every minute of it, that you will never get. So I think there's probably a balance to be struck there.
In terms of ex-players who become pundits, players turned pundits, a lot of them are hopeless, but a lot of them are really good. In a Scottish context, I think Neil McCann is terrific. I think Davy Provan over the years has been terrific. I think Ali McCoist is a really good pundit. He's insightful and he's also funny and humorous.
I think Darren O'Dee's pretty good on Celtic TV because he is there talking about the game from the perspective of an ex-player that understands the game, and that's, I think, what people want. I just think it's a bit of a tired old trope. The guys fall out of the game of football and immediately get a punditry gig. That being said, Ali McCoist is a good pundit. He's a funny guy. He knows the game. He's enthusiastic about it.
With the whole lockdown and the COVID thing, you've got to look at what positives will come out of this. And I think a lot of fan media has risen quite a lot because of it, because people can't go on a supporters bus and talk about it after the match. They can't talk about the game while they're there. They can't go and sit at the pub. So where do they get opinions that they want to agree or argue with? They'll listen to the podcasts or the YouTube channels that are available or the blogs, and it just gives an extra voice that currently is missing, and hopefully that the popularity of it continues throughout after. Yes,
fan media. Yes, footballers turned pundits. Yes, mainstream professional journalists like me. And the rule is, Ryan, I think there's a place for all these guys. And what you want is the insight and the talent from all these different camps. And I come back to it. You'll get really good, and you'll get utter, and you'll get some so average stuff in the middle. And I guess that's how it will be.
To end this video, let's go back to where we started and carry through that all-important message. Football really is nothing without the fans.